All right, guys, we're continuing our look at the progressive era now. As we move into the second industrial revolution, you see new ways of doing business, and you had these corporations that would encourage investment from people in return for a percentage of the profits. Banks would then make loans also to these corporations to help them grow faster, and so you have massive businesses emerge in the United States during this time period, and that's going to lead to positives and some negatives in some ways as well. The first guy we're going to talk about is Andrew Carnegie. This is a Scottish immigrant who would help build a steel empire by using the Bessemer process. He'd also use vertical integration, buying the companies that provided the equipment and materials he needed, combining it all into one large-scale corporation.
It's 1872, and Andrew Carnegie, a 5'3" Scottish immigrant iron millionaire, is in Sheffield, England. He's looking at the future. A revolutionary way to make steel. Steel has been around for thousands of years, but so expensive to produce, it's always been a luxury item. 2,000 years ago, it's used in Oriental swords. It is even used in designer jewelry. But America stands at the brink of a new age. To build it, they need steel, and lots of it. It's the only material strong enough for the towers that will touch the sky. An English bullet maker is showing Carnegie a new but simple method of producing steel. He's stunned. Blast hot air through molten iron. Carbon impurities burn off. You get the wonder material, steel. For the first time, it can be produced quickly and inexpensively. If Carnegie can use this Bessemer process to mass produce it, he'll own the future. Carnegie returns to the States, to Pittsburgh, to start building the biggest steel plant in the world. It'll be larger than 80 football fields. It's a massive gamble. Carnegie risks everything he's got on the new plant. But only months into construction, disaster. A catastrophic stock market collapse. The economy is in free fall. He has to borrow even more money and barely scrapes through. August 1875. Against all odds, Carnegie's giant furnaces are ready to test. Steel production is phenomenally dangerous. Inside, 5 tons of molten metal. 3,000 degrees. Hot enough to vaporize a man in seconds. If it works, it will make Carnegie one of the richest men in the world. But there's a lot more at stake. Skyscrapers, cars, washing machines, airplanes, even space travel. None of it can happen if steel can't be mass-produced. It's a success. Carnegie is the first ever to mass produce steel. Prices plummet by over 80%. Output rockets from a few thousand tons in 1860 to 11 million by 1900.
So many American stories of success are diligence, perseverance, but there's an awful lot of luck involved too.
His timing couldn't have been better. It was steel that built American cities. It was steel that built American railroads. It was steel that built American shipping. By the beginning of the 20th century, he was one of the wealthiest men in America.
Pittsburgh transforms from a sleepy town to the industrial heart of the nation. Its population triples. Driven by a new steel railroad, millions of tons of steel are transported across America, the raw material to build the modern city.
You see Carnegie here, by using that vertical integration, clearly developed this massive steel empire. He would eventually sell it to J.P. Morgan, a banker, for $450 million. Morgan would then turn it into U.S. Steel and make it the first billion-dollar corporation in America. But Carnegie used his money to also fund public works and philanthropy, like the Argentine Library, which you see here, right here in Kansas City, Kansas, as well as Carnegie Hall in New York and Carnegie Mellon University, using that money for the benefit of people. So some saw him in a lot of ways as positives, while others would see these guys as negatives. The other one we're going to talk about is John D. Rockefeller. He made his first oil refinery when he was 26 years old. By 1870, he had organized the Standard Oil Company of Ohio into refining oil, not actually drilling for it. He used horizontal integration. He would combine the competing companies to one large corporation, forming the Standard Oil Trust. What he did was he lowered his prices to help drive out competitors, and then he would buy stock in the other companies when they were low and trade it for Standard Oil stock. And in doing so, became basically the only oil refining company in the entire United States. He also used his money for positives, building things like Rockefeller Center and the University of Chicago, that you see here. That total control, though, led some people to think that maybe this wasn't as good for America. So there was this big debate because some saw them as a threat to competition, so they called guys like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan robber barons. There's others who saw them as captains of industry who built up the economy and created jobs. And they believed that only the fittest company should survive, this idea of social Darwinism, which they used to justify harsh working conditions. And that same social Darwinism would be used to justify discrimination we'll talk about later. But those harsh working conditions, you had women and children who were as young as 8 years old were working in these huge factories, breathing in fibers and dust all day. You had burns and death from molten metal. By 1869, workers had organized, but there was still a lot of risk to working in these factories. And in 1911, a fire broke out at the Triangle Shirtwaist Company, where women had been locked inside to make certain that they weren't leaving early from work. Well, it was up on the top floor of this high-rise, and so women actually jumped to their deaths trying to escape the flames. 150 women ended up getting killed and led to some changes in safety. But in 1869, the Knights of Labor were formed to organize all workers in industries. The problem was that by organizing unskilled workers, you really didn't do very well. You also had workers who tried to march for better things, and in Chicago, in Haymarket Square, a riot broke out because somebody threw a bomb and killed some police officers, and that led some people to have some negative views of unions. And you also have Samuel Gompers, who would form the American Federation of Labor, which permitted only skilled workers, which allowed them much greater control in the negotiating process through collective bargaining. But with the violent strikes, unions lost a lot of their support, and so that eventually there were only 3% of workers actually in labor unions. Thanks guys for paying attention. Hopefully we took good notes.